What do HIH Insurance, National Australia Bank, ANZ Bank, James Hardie and Centro have in common? Well, if you answered that they all lost a lot of money in recent circumstances in a very public way, then you'd be right. But behind all of those losses is one simple cause, and that was the failure to ask the right questions at the right time. In fact, in most companies, most organizations, the amount of losses is quite substantial as a result. A managing director of a construction company who presented his report to the group of people at his table during the workshop, there was one word in the report, it was a two-page report that had been submitted to his executive team only a few months before. There's one word in the report that seemed innocuous to general reading, but the group at his table picked up on this word and asked him specifically about it and what it meant, and then took it further as to the background for that particular word. The word itself was fairly vague, and it had probably been written in a vague fashion quite deliberately by the author of that particular report. But the managing director afterwards said that it was really interesting from his viewpoint, because that particular point, after the executive team had originally considered it some months before, that particular point had cost them $5 million in losses, because nobody asked the questions that the group at the table asked. So he was fairly impressed with that. He wasn't impressed with his own team, who didn't pick it up, and neither did he, but he was impressed with the fact that without knowing any background about the business, you could look at language and understand how risk arises from the way in which people express information that may not be clear enough for the reader. And it's very easy for the reader to overlook it as part of just scanning across the document. This workshop is designed to give you the questions and drill the exercises so you get the hang of how to ask the questions, when to ask the questions, how to probe deeper. You'll see perhaps a document that relates to an industry or matters that you have absolutely no knowledge of. And the beauty is that you don't need to have the knowledge. I want you to get the experience, if possible, of looking at something that's completely foreign to you and being able to choose the language in it and test the language and then dig deeper and get the information from it. It means then that you can go anywhere, in any role, with any client, any customers, or whatever the case is, without knowing any of the circumstances, and be able to ask insightful questions that go right to the guts, right to the heart of what the issues are, simply by listening to what people are saying. It gives you much more power than having to know all the technicality. If somebody is using language that indicates a contracted way of perceiving or thinking, then you can use a question that opens up that language and it shifts their thinking once they start to answer it. Because the language people use reflects their thinking process. You'll be able to open up all the issues very quickly with 1, 2, or 3 questions. And from there you can take it into the technical issues if you want to. But you'll have the way to deal with most of the sorts of language that people use when they're obfuscating or trying to pull the wool over your eyes, simply not understanding properly what they're doing, or opening up to potential risks that they aren't aware of. They're not difficult. They're very natural questions, and they're very easy to learn. It's just a question of how you use them. These are not questions that you won't have asked before. They're not mysterious questions. They're questions that from time to time you'll have used, time to time you've heard other people use, but most people do not use them effectively. What we're talking about is very normal questions that you use conversationally, that are almost imperceptible in a conversation, but they have a massive effect in the way in which they shift people's thinking, sense of responsibility, accountability, and clarity. When you leave the workshop, you'll be able to use this straight away. In fact, you can walk out of the workshop at lunchtime and go into a meeting straight after lunch, and you'll be able to use these questions immediately. As with everything, the more you practice them, the better you get at them, as simple as that. But you will be able to use them when you walk out immediately, and you'll get results when you walk out. We found it's very useful if preferably 3 or more people in a particular meeting or in a team know how to ask the questions. Then they're able to bounce off each other in meetings, and it's not up to one person to keep asking the questions if other people get a bit fed up with that. The other thing is, if one person asks one question, that will trigger and open up an avenue for another person to ask the question. If you know how to ask the questions, basically you'll get through your meetings in up to half the time that you normally do. Much better results, and a lot better action plan at the end, much more effective meetings. 2 or 3 is enough for that. If you have a whole team that can do it, it's almost a dream to have a meeting. You get results that you often struggle to get before it. So you become much clearer in your expression, and much clearer in the way in which you convey the information. Fewer fuzzies, basically. A lot of companies have extremely fuzzy language in their documents. It's almost impossible to really understand what they're talking about unless you ask a hell of a lot of questions. And what we've found is that people who do the course tend to then write their documents much clearer, because they're asking themselves the questions as they're writing the document, and they're getting clearer not only in their own minds of what they're talking about, what they're writing about, but also much clearer about what the listener is likely to hear or read, and they'll get to understand better what the likely problems are when they do the presentation. So you'll have a much better presentation at the end. And the benefit for the person who's on the receiving end of the document, the board or the executive team, is that they get better quality information immediately. So the document may not necessarily be shorter, but it's going to be a lot clearer, which means that the decision can be made quicker and with less consternation and anxiety and with more certainty. It doesn't make everything 100% certain, because not everything is 100% certain. But where there's a large degree of uncertainty, you often have a large degree of risk. And then you need to have different options that will cover the risk and to cover the ground. If the first option fails and second option fails, you need to have alternative strategies to be able to make up the ground or to move in another direction. But those things become clear once you start asking the right questions. And a lot of people just don't.